I must admit, I looked at your previous speakers and I thought it's rare that my name and theirs gets mentioned in the same sentence, so I'm truly humbled to be here. I'm also very appreciative because, unbeknownst to many of you, my daughter is an alumnus of the Colorado State University. I should say alumna. And so it's very pleased to see all of the women that have been involved in this effort. And the goal of this talk is going to be very simple. It's to hopefully let you better understand the world you live in. It's a simple one. So if we can start, I'm not sure, do I do that? Yep. It's where our food comes, the origins of plants on our plates. Now, in this, I want to give you some topics so you have sort of the outline. We're going to talk a little bit about the plant kingdom. It's the one I like to work with. We're going to talk about the centers of origin and the centers of diversity, which is subtly different, but they're very important for us that eat food. Okay? We're going to show you some crop ancestors in the wild. We're going to show you the origin of wheat, which is an example of domestication. We're going to show you plant exchanges and learning from other cultures, some lesson learned. And then we're going to end a little bit on plant breeding because that's modern domestication. So we want to take you basically from the wild relatives to what you consume today. And hopefully we'll do that in kind of a fun way. Okay, now I'm a proud agriculturalist, so I like to start with this slide. And it is few scientists think of agriculture as the chief or model science. Many indeed do not consider it a science at all. Yet it was the first science that makes all human life possible. And it may well be that before the century is over, the success or failure of science as a whole will be judged by the success or failure of agriculture. That was written in 1974, and for those of you that are of my generation, you may remember the book, The Population Bomb, that predicted millions and millions of people dying due to famine. And it was averted by the Green Revolution, the first one, and now we're looking at, we're going to lead a second one to sustain our lives for the future. So we're coming from a proud agricultural heritage. It's nice to be at a proud agricultural school, too. And by the way, when I turn my head, can you still hear me? Not as well. Okay, so I'll have to be a little bit more careful. Thanks for letting me know that, though. I don't know if you can see this, but this is from the National Botanical Garden, and it talks about plants. And the first one is what plants do. The first side is that they create oxygen. The second one is that they create food. And can you imagine a world without plants? And the short answer is you can't, because we wouldn't exist if there weren't plants. Now, I like this slide because it's the tree of life. And literally it has everything of all the plants you can see. So, you have things such as the seedless non-vascular, the seedless vascular, the gymnosperms. Now, for those of you that don't know what a gymnosperm is, think conifers, okay? It's your pine trees. Over here you have the angiosperms, and here you have the dicots, which I think probably has a better name than what I just called it, but the monocots and the dicots. The monocots are the plants that have the veins on the leaves running in parallel, and the dicots are the ones that have the fishnet veins, okay? And what I like is when you look at these things, you can see down here that you have various things. I think that's blueberries, there's sunflowers. Up here you have various of the monocots, including the grasses. I work with wheat, and if you look at wheat, rice, corn, barley, sorghum, you basically feed the world. Those are your main starch grains. So one of the questions that comes up almost immediately is, what is a crop? And what that comes down to is that how is it different from a weed, okay? Well, now, you have, and I should have really made this a little more continuous, because you have wild plants that are wild flowers, and they're neither weeds nor crops, okay? So on one end of the spectrum, you have the wild flowers, the wild plants. A weed is generally an unwanted organism that thrives in habitats disturbed by humans, okay? So first of all, you need to understand it relates to humanity. We define what a weed is, number one. And then number two is it thrives in areas that we've disturbed. So you don't think of weeds really out in a pristine pasture. That's not a weed. That's not something we've disturbed. Okay? Now, domestication comes from the Latin word, and it literally means to bring into the home to serve all. And it spans from serving humankind to being unable to survive without human intervention. So, what's an example of something that serves humanity without necessarily, which still survives in nature. The maple tree. You get maple syrup from it, right? Most of the collections in New England, you go out, you tap natural maple trees, you get the maple syrup. That's an indigenous plant in nature being used. Another example is the cocoa bean. Most of the cocoa, or cacao, which is what you get chocolate from, is harvested by indigenous peoples, okay? So that's a plant in wild that serves humanity, but it's not something which can't survive without human intervention. What's an example of a plant that can't survive without intervention? Human intervention? Corn. The domesticated corn basically needs us to plant and harvest it. So that gives you a little bit of difference. And a crop plant is something that's harvested. And this comes from the definitions that were from H.D. Harlan, it's Jack Harlan, it's his son, one of the great people studying crop evolution and domestication. Now, I told you earlier we're going to talk about the centers of origin and the centers of diversity. And there's a little bit of a difference here. And if you go into the literature, you'll find it's a little bit conflicted. Originally, they thought that the center of origin, which is where the crop originated, would be identified by, it is also where the crop would be most diverse. The idea being that if it had started there, it would have the greatest length of time to evolve, okay? So that was the centers of origin, and they assumed it was the center of diversity. In practice, that actually doesn't work quite that well. Because what you discover is when a crop moves from its center of origin to an ecologically diverse area, it can diversify on the basis of that climate. So actually, your most diverse centers tend to be near mountains. Because for every 50 to 100 meters you go up the side of a mountain, you add a change in degree in temperature. And so you get much more diversity on anything that has a slope on it. And in fact, if you go down to Cape Town, South Africa, and you look at their great center of diversity, which is on the peninsula just out from there, it's because of the climes, these sides of mountains. Now, so the center of diversity is where the crop diversified and the greatest genetic variance exists, and it is in the diverse areas. Well, now the next thing, and this is where I'm going to have to be sort of, see if I can do this. Maybe I'll do it this way. Maybe this will be a little easier. How's that? And if you can't hear me, let me know, because it doesn't do you much good to watch, okay? And especially when I'm talking up here and you can't sign read either, okay? These are the great genetic treasure maps of the world, okay? And these are the centers of diversity. So I always like to look at these things because people don't know where their crops come from. And Heidi, am I in your way? Oh, okay, good. I was just thinking between me and the podium, it's getting pretty wide on this side, so I apologize. I should be a little thinner, I think. Okay. Well, let's start out and just figure out where things came from, okay? So we might as well start at the first center, which is this one right here. That's Mexico and Guatemala. What sort of things came from there? Well, Mark Brick will probably tell you beans, okay, the common bean. We also had corn, the cacao plant, which is chocolate, cashews, the New World cotton, sweet potato, tobacco, we're going to come back to that one, and tomato, okay? Now, if you come down in the New World, you go to the Peru, Ecuador, you have the other branch of common beans, okay? Again, cacao, corn, New World cotton, guava, potato, okay? So you got to remember that's where potatoes came from. Okay, and a few other things. You go to southern Chile, you get the Chilean strawberry and some more potatoes. Okay. Now, if you go to Brazil and Paraguay, which is this area, you get the Brazil nut. Okay. You can get cassava. Now, most of us think of cassava being African, but it's where it originates, is in Peru. You get the peanut and you get the pineapple. Okay? Now let's go to the agricultural breadbasket, and I think Colorado's probably in the corner there somewhere. And for this talk, we will assume it is. Okay? Might as well. Okay. What great agricultural crops come from America? Are you ready? Blueberry. Okay, yeah, we can hear it from blueberry. How about a shout out for cranberry? Yeah, okay. Jerusalem artichoke. Does that sound like a misnomer?